in this country's history. It gives the state a structured framework to intervene, and this is progress. From a legal standpoint, Mr. President, this bill does several things well. It criminalizes abuse and neglect of older persons. It introduces mandatory reporting, ensuring that professionals cannot turn a blind eye to the persons who helped to put us the place we are today. It regulates residential care facilities, which many families in this country rely on. And it recognizes the rights of older persons, including their dignity, their privacy, and their participation. And these are not small things, Mr. President. These are foundational, because for too long, the elderly in this country have existed in a kind of legal invisibility, respected culturally, but insignificantly protected structurally. But unfortunately, this is where I must pause. Because while this bill is strong on legal protection, it's less clear on autonomy. So let me make this real. Imagine a 72-year-old woman who lives alone. Her house is not in the best condition. She forgets things sometimes. So her children believe that she is no longer safe, because forgetting things from time to time here and there can be a bit dangerous, especially when living alone. Under this bill, she could be reported, she could be assessed, and she could be potentially removed from her home into a place of safety. Now, here's the question, Mr. President. What if she does not want to leave? What if, despite the risks, that home represents her independence, her memories, her identity? Then are we protecting her, or are we deciding for her? Because there's a fine line between care and control. As an attorney, Mr. President, one of my central concerns is this. This bill doesn't provide a robust framework for determining mental capacity. And I know Honourable Senator Cummings earlier mentioned that this is the reason why the Reform Mental Health Bill is coming soon. And I eagerly and anxiously anticipate this because it is critical. Without that, Mr. President, we risk treating all older persons as inherently vulnerable. We risk making decisions for them rather than with them. Mr. President, modern human rights law moves us towards supportive decision-making and away from substitutive decision-making. So in simple terms, it's not we decide for you, but we support you. We provide everything that you need so you can understand, so you can make the decision on your own. And that distinction is everything. Yes, Mr. President, the guiding principles in this bill speak to participation of older persons and all levels of decision-making, for example. But principles are not enough. I would, honestly, while I wait on this Mental Health Act, I would have liked to see in this legislation the appointment of supporters rather than substitutive decision makers. I would have liked to see the legal presumption of capacity. I would have liked to see procedural safeguards for personal autonomy and the right to challenge substantive decisions, Mr. President. Because guiding principles essentially influence interpretation, but they're aspirational, not structural. And yes, Section 23(3) of the bill speaks to having the consent of the older person before they're removed from the home, unless they're incapable of giving that consent. But we essentially, in one section, giving persons consent and taking it away in the other hand. Because what, Mr. President, is consent? And how do we determine if someone is incapable? This might sound like if I'm picking at things, but the reality, Mr. President, is those who feels it, knows it. And I can tell you, that I know firsthand how people in Barbados treat to persons who they think are a bit different to them. I've had people asking my companions for consent for things regarding me, even though I'm sitting right there. I've had people pushing forms that my mother said, sign this on her behalf, even though I'm capable of making my own decisions. I've had a doctor tell me, I am examining you, you have to go and come back with somebody to speak on your behalf so I can protect myself. Even though I'm a consenting adult with no cognitive challenges that I'm aware of, and that I have a voice, and sometimes it could be loud, but that doesn't matter in this society. Because when we have an impression and we make up our mind about what we believe, we stick to it. I've had older persons come to me and tell me, they go to the bank, they ask for a bank card, and the bankers tell them, I ain't giving you the bank card because when old people, let's let young people carry away with the money and run things for you all. No, we telling older persons they can have consent. But what is consent if you're forcing other people to do things on their behalf? So I ask us to be careful as it relates to this. Mr. President, I commend the drafters, what they have done as it relates to stating that persons need to give consent. But true dignity requires more than consultation. It requires legal structures that preserve our autonomy through structured and legal decision-making. So yes, while we anticipate and we wait on the Mental Health Act, I would have liked to see more done in this act to protect the autonomy of our older persons. And this brings me to another point that I'm very passionate about, the intersection between aging and disability. Because many older persons are not just elderly, they're also visually impaired. They may have mobility challenges. They may be living with dementia or cognitive conditions. And we cannot treat this as separate categories. So let me give a simple example. A blind elderly man trying to access his finances. He may need assistance to read documents. He may need assistance navigating digital banking. But you know what happens too often? His independence is stripped away entirely. Someone else controls his finances. Someone else makes decisions on his behalf. And what starts as help becomes dependency. And sometimes even exploitation. And this is where elder abuse and disability discrimination intersect. So when we talk about older persons, Mr. President, we must ensure accessibility is in place. We must ensure assistive support is in place. We must ensure that they're inclusive systems, because without them, protection alone is not enough. So I encourage us that when we read this bill, to read it alongside the Right of Persons with Disabilities Act that was passed in this chamber just last year. Because we need to realize that disability and the elderly are not always separate. But Mr. President, let me bring this a little closer to home. As a young person, I just don't see this bill as law. I see it as a preview of my future. One day, I may be the daughter making decisions for my parents. I may be the advocate trying to protect them. The person hoping that the system treats them with dignity. And one day, no time soon, I may be the older person myself. So the question I ask is simple. Would I want to be protected, or would I want to be respected? And the answer is both. So there are areas where I believe that we must be careful. Well, they are essential. For example, the broad state powers. the ability to remove individuals from their homes, the ability to enter premises and exercise enforcement powers. These are extremely crucial. They are necessary, but they should be carefully balanced with safeguards, because we, at the same time, we want to protect the privacy of our older persons. As it relates to the overly broad reporting obligations, the bill places reporting obligations on a wide range of persons, even outside traditional reporting roles. And this is essential as well, because we want to ensure that our persons are not facing any form of abuse and they're getting the care that they need at all times. But this can lead to over-reporting and unnecessary intrusion into private lives again. So I ask that we be careful and offer and put in place essential safeguards to protect the privacy of our older persons. So I would like to offer the following recommendations before I go. I urge us to introduce a clear capacity framework. And I know we say it's coming in mental health and the lasting power of attorney that we eagerly await. But I need us that when we are doing that we ensure that we carefully define how capacity is assessed. We need to ensure that decisions are not made arbitrarily. We need to embed supportive decision making. We need to allow our older persons to appoint trusted supporters, and so that we can prioritize their voice in all decisions and ensure that where possible, we ensure that everything is in place, that even if they're having a little difficulties understanding or accessing the information, that we aid them in understanding, assessing, and giving their decisions, their consent at every stage of the process. Not just ask a question, and if they don't understand, say, well, I asked and she consents, so that's that. We need to ensure that we respect their autonomy. I urge us to strengthen judicial oversight as well. Ensure that court involvement is in every non-consensual removal except in true emergencies. And finally, Mr. President, I want to urge that we invest more in community-based care. And I know this government has already done some wonderful work in this area and started some work in this area, helping to place more focus on community care rather than institutionalized in persons. But I urge us to expand home-based services and support families and caregivers. Because I said it in my maiden speech, Mr. President, when a daughter leaves her job to take care of her parents, we see it as, yeah, she loved her parents. Oh, she cared for them. And yes, that is true. But you know what is also true? It comes at a high cost, a very high cost. And we don't want our elderly persons to pay that cost to their detriment. So I want to encourage us to provide support for our caregivers financially, but especially as it relates to mental health support. Because it's not easy. It's not easy seeing your parents as the ones who raised you and then seeing them needing your help day in and day out. And sometimes dealing with different challenges are not easy. And we need to ensure that persons have the right support as well for that. Mr. President, this bill is necessary, it's timely, and it's commendable. But legislation like this must do more than just protect bodies. It must preserve dignity, it must preserve autonomy, and it must preserve identity. Because aging is not a condition to be managed, it is a stage of life to be respected. So let's pass this bill, Mr. President, but let's refine it. Let's ensure that when our elderly look at this law, They do not see a system that controls them, but one that stands with them. And let's ensure that when our time comes, and it will come, Mr. President, let's ensure that we inherit a system that treats us not as burdens, but as human beings, still deserving of choice, voice, and respect. And with that, I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Odell. Any of the speakers? If there are no speakers, Senator Trim.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and the Honourable Chamber. I want to start with something that I typically hear my mother saying a lot. I think a lot of times to remind me that life continues and that life is a circle, and that really is once a man, twice a child. And she often says it to remind me that my youthful exuberance or how I see the world will be altered as I continue on this journey of life. And I know that many persons in the chamber and across Barbados have heard this as well. They're very simple. They're those things that we hear repeated consistently. Oftentimes as younger people, we hear them, but we don't necessarily understand what it truly means until we get a bit older. And I think about that in terms of when I was younger and people would say, oh my goodness, you get so big. And it really used to bother me, like, duh. But now I am at the stage where I see babies writing the common entrance exam, going off to secondary school. Some of the children that I looked after when I was younger are now having children, and all I could say is, whoa, you get so big. And it really reminds us that most of the things that we see or that we hear, we eventually repeat as we get older, hopefully only the good things. But the statement captures something very serious about human life, that strength is not permanent, that youth fades. It captures that independence also is not permanent, that eventually most of us who have the privilege to see 70 will have to depend on somebody to look after us. That the hands that once held bottles and the bodies that nursed children, the ones that nurture children, will eventually need to be held themselves. And so those who have worked for us and cared for us will eventually require care. Mr. President, when I think about this bill and when I read through the bill, I thought about my next door neighbor who would tell me stories of his tussle before I even understood what a tussle was. I think about the woman down the street who would talk about how young people don't got strong arms because we don't stir in a cuckoo. I think about my mother talking about the kind of grass, lemongrass, and all the different things that she would find because she wouldn't go to the pharmacy. She would pick something and boil it and say, this is going to make you feel better. Those are the things that I think about in this bill. I think about the knowledge of a generation, the knowledge that is passed from one generation to another, and knowledge that we sometimes take for granted because we do not appreciate the brevity of life. And so this bill arrives at a very important moment to me, because oftentimes what I see arising in Barbados, and I have fallen prey to it myself, I must admit, is that generations seem oftentimes to be battling with each other, and we have to be honest about that. There is a tension that seems to emerge in generations: frustration, economic pressure, and the feeling that different generations are competing rather than supporting each other. And so when Senator King asks why, this is why. Because there is a tension that we have to resolve, and this bill, in my mind, is an important step to doing so. A lot of times it sounds like a us versus them situation. And somewhere in the midst of that tension, empathy has been eroded. And you cannot necessarily legislate empathy, but you can create a framework that encourages people to see each other as people. And so instead of understanding one another, generations sometimes begin speaking against each other. All the old people in the workplace, young people can't get any jobs. The young people take everything for granted. They have no respect. And so we spend a lot of time arguing. And it is dangerous for any society when community begins to be so eroded that generations stop seeing each other as connected. The reality is that the struggles facing younger people in Barbados and those that face the older generation are not so different or separate. They are deeply linked. When young people feel emotionally strained and caregiving becomes harder, when families are under pressure, older people become more vulnerable to neglect or isolation. And so when our communities weaken, we see those vulnerabilities and challenges and that suffering in different ways. And so I believe it is important not to frame social policy as one generation coming at the expense of the other, but more that supporting older persons does not take away from young people, and that supporting young people does not mean the abandonment of older persons, and to cultivate a society where each generation understands that we depend on one another. For the elderly, you find wisdom. Someone mentioned, one of the honourable members mentioned earlier, that if you sit and you talk with an older person, there's so much that you learn and consume, often not written in books or recorded. And young people bring energy and innovation and are responsible for shaping the future. And so one generation lays the foundation and the other generation carries it forward. And so in order for any society to exist and to thrive, there must be reciprocity between the two. I believe that this legislation pushes us to a moment of greater understanding, to appreciate some of the things that we have taken for granted. And it reminds us that aging is not a separate issue belonging only to one group of people, but rather it is part, as said by Senator Honourable, of a shared human journey and collective social responsibility that touches every family, every community, and eventually, God willing, each and every one of us. One of the things that I heard earlier is that the net is too wide. Senator Goodrich mentioned that the net is too wide, particularly for the definition of abuse. That the definition was broad and that the reporting obligations are extensive, and the concern of possible overreach and unnecessary intervention into private family matters. And I want to say that I understand why those concerns are being raised. Any legislation that deals with vulnerability and protection, reporting, any kind of intervention must be approached carefully. We have to be mindful of proportionality, we have to be mindful of fairness, and the balance between protection and personal autonomy as mentioned before. But we must also ask a different question. What are the consequences when the net is too narrow? Because historically, one of the greatest challenges that we will have in abuse and neglect is really and truly that too many people fall outside the scope of protection until it is too late. That people often go neglected and abused, and not because they are ignored, but because we don't necessarily see something as being falling into the category of neglect or abuse. And something about abuse in our culture is kind of subjective, because there are people who see no issue with beating their children black and blue. There are persons who have come up in households where that is the norm, and so that tradition continues. And so if we leave the idea that we can capture every aspect of neglect or abuse in a set and defined set of criteria, and we seek to narrow it too much, there will be persons who will fall through the cracks. Neglect and abuse are not always dramatic. They're not always simple. It can be complicated, it can be layered, and it is sometimes very difficult to detect from the outside. And so while there must always be safeguards against misuse, I would rather see legislation that errs on the side of protection and is then challenged as it should be, than to have legislation so narrow and restrictive that vulnerable older persons remain invisible until a tragedy happens, and like we say so many times in Barbados, Kadir. I wish we had known. And so the reason that the bill must cast a broad net is because vulnerability itself is broad. Because older persons, as mentioned before, are vulnerable financially, emotionally, psychologically, socially, and physically. A person might appear stable while privately experiencing neglect or exploitation. A person may not have visible injuries, there may be no scars, but they may be isolated, they may be manipulated, abandoned, or deprived of dignity. Someone might have family all around them and technically be very much unsupported and feel as though they are all alone. So protection can not only be limited to the extreme cases, but must also account for those quieter forms of harm that may go unnoticed in societies like ours. I know that culturally we have a discomfort around things that may seem too broad, particularly when it comes to matters that appear private, because we like not to intervene in private spaces, in people's private lives. But privacy cannot become a shield behind which we allow for abuse, neglect, or exploitation to flourish, and which is why I welcome the mandatory reporting as outlined in the bill. It is very important that if you see something, you say something, because you could save a life. Community responsibility requires intervention. Protection requires discomfort. And safeguarding dignity sometimes requires us to move beyond the attitude of mind your own business and dine my circus nor my monkeys when somebody's well-being is clearly at risk. Does that mean that every report becomes a punishment? No. It does not mean that every family disagreement becomes state interference. And it certainly does not mean that older persons lose autonomy simply because of their aging. One of the bill's strengths is that when you examine it next to other legislation from other jurisdictions, what you notice is that it centers dignity, it seeks to center participation and the rights of older persons, and it recognizes older people as individuals with agency and not merely subjects of control. And so I do not see this legislation as overreaching. The legislation also asks a very serious question of us as a society. When the people who once carried Barbados can no longer carry themselves in the same way, what responsibility does Barbados have to them in return? Not simply what systems we create or what penalties exist, but what kind of country we are actually and purposefully choosing to be. There is a version of Barbados that we still hold very dear, where community meant something tangible, where neighbors checked in on each other without invitation, where if my mother and somebody not speaking, especially if it's an older person, I see them coming down the street, I still had to help them out. Because if my mother find out that I was rude to an older person, matter of fact, my mother was the kind of mother who believed that it was not simply her right to discipline me. And so neighbors could do so as well. But the truth is that a lot of that has changed. And we have to be honest about the change. We also have to accept that some of those persons who are older have a responsibility or are responsible for some of the changes that we have seen. And so life is harder for many people. Community has broken down. People individually are stretched emotionally, financially, and mentally, and sometimes they want to assist but do not have the capacity. Families are smaller. Migration has stretched relatives across countries and continents. Many households are trying to survive. People are working long hours, sometimes multiple jobs, and so caregiving has become increasingly difficult. What used to be shared among extended families and communities now falls to one person trying to do it alone. And so when that pressure becomes exceptionally great and the support is absent, it is often our elderly that suffer the consequences quite quietly. The other thing that I want to speak about briefly is the gendered nature of care work. Because while the bill speaks about care, protection, support, and responsibility, the reality is that in Barbados, as in many societies across the world, the burden of caregiving still falls overwhelmingly on women. And Senator Odom mentioned that we say, it is simply that, you love your parent. But the truth is that and if you examine the assessing the impact of unpaid care work on families in Barbados, a report by UN Women in 2024, it notes that while there has been a shift away from women taking on all of the responsibility, it still continues that women predominantly and disproportionately take on care labor. And so it is something that we expect women to carry quite naturally, and without support, because society has normalized that care work is women's work. And we don't speak enough, I believe, Mr. President, about the emotional, physical, and financial toll that this places on women across the country. The report also mentions about the sacrifice of sometimes their work in terms of being able to earn a living and how that impacts them because of the care work. So some women are able to balance full-time employment while caring for aging parents at home, administering medication before work, rushing home after work, sometimes rushing home during lunch, sacrificing rest opportunities, and even their own health to provide care for loved ones, carrying in the emotional weight of watching parents decline. And I don't know that we speak openly enough about the kind of toll that takes on you, trying to raise children, maintain households, and survive the pressures of modern life. And there's very little structural support and very little recognition. One of the injustices of care work is that although it is essential to keep our economy afloat, it is invisible, it is undervalued, and because it largely takes place in private spaces, the persons who have to carry this weight are simply expected to cope. But care work is definitely work. And so conversations like this, aging and elder care, must also include conversations about gender and how do we ensure that there is support for the system, as women often absorb the shock when care services are unaffordable, when an elderly relative needs daily assistance, and we've seen attempts and we've seen interventions by the government continuously to support persons who may have to care for parents who are or persons who are aging. And it is something that should continue and has to continue. And so as a society, we have very important conversations ahead of us as Barbados heads very quickly to being a super age society. I believe that in this same line, we have to seriously consider stronger frameworks about family care leave in terms of taking care of parents who may be terminal or struggling with illnesses such as dementia, as well as mental health leave in Barbados. And I look forward to the legislation that will come and the work that is being done across Barbados in terms of ensuring that there is enough support for persons who have to look after older persons. Because if we believe in community and family values, our policies have to reflect that. Our policies have to show that we care about persons who are caring for their aging relatives. And so that allows a level of flexibility because caregiving sustains families and families sustain Barbados. So I continue to say, and I'll go back to saying that the systems that we are building through the legislation like this to ensuring that the elderly is protected, because some of the concern that persons may have about placing their family in care facilities is really the treatment of their elderly family. And so they may be more reluctant and they may opt to take on the responsibility because they're not certain how their family members may be treated. Having a strong framework and standard would allow for persons to have a lot more confidence. The last thing that I want to touch on is that as we look at this legislation, it speaks strongly to community, and I believe that community continues to break down, and we see that manifesting in different ways. We see that manifesting in young people seemingly not having guidance, everybody reverting into their own spaces, and a level of individualism that many persons may be very unfamiliar with in Barbados. And so it is important that we practice consistently the community that we speak of. Because real community does not only show up when the cameras are present, it doesn't only care when things are exceptionally bad, and it does not discard people once they are no longer economically productive. And so the modern society pushes us in the opposite direction. Modern society is concerned about human value through productivity. What do you contribute? What do you produce? What can you generate economically? And somehow when people move beyond that approach, that phase of life, there is an unspoken tendency that is continuously growing more visible, to be quite honest, and very much louder, that they are less central, less relevant, and less visible, less important. And this bill is this government's way of pushing back against that mindset. That older persons are not burdens to be managed. They are human beings with rights, histories, contributions, wisdom, and value. Aging should not mean invisibility. And I think that matters greatly in a society like ours when we are seeing demographics change, when we see persons living to the age of 106 and 107, when we cannot approach aging as if it is someone else's issue, and we cannot leave the dignity of growing old to the whims and fancies of any and everyone. If we are fortunate, aging is the future most of us are moving towards ourselves. And so the question is, what kind of Barbados are we creating for our own future? Will Barbados be a place where aging feels like isolation, or where aging still feels like you belong? I love to watch Q in the community, and I know everybody's got Q, but something about watching Q makes me very excited about aging. Q and my bar card. I don't know. I like Q. Will Barbados feel like a place where older persons are simply tolerated? Will Barbados feel like a place where older persons are simply tolerated, or one where they feel valued? And will it be a Barbados where care is inconsistent and dependent on chance, or where dignity is protected intentionally and as a collective? Mr. President, the legislation alone cannot create compassion. It cannot manufacture patience, empathy, or kindness. Laws can only establish standards, but cultures determine whether these standards truly live. And so I support this bill wholeheartedly. It challenges us not simply within the legal framework, but morally, socially, and personally. How we treat people, how we treat older people. Is it with impatience, or is it with kindness and grace? It reveals whether we value people only for what they can produce, or whether we understand that human dignity is more enduring than economic usefulness. This bill is important because abuse and neglect cannot be ignored. Care must be treated seriously and be structured to ensure that we reaffirm that we cannot afford to lose a generation that will continue to provide us with lessons, guidance, and instructions. And so I return to the words that my mother has always said, once a man, twice a child. The difference is the second time around, the responsibility is ours. So I sit.
Thank you very much, Senator Trim. Senator Andrew Niles.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. And good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, the audience. To follow on from Senator Trim's lead of once a man, twice a child, it's a very interesting concept. Some people take it literally, Mr. President, to say that, you know, when you're young, you're in diapers, and when you get very old, you probably could get back to being in diapers as well. But today is a very interesting. In your absence, sir, my colleague, Senator King, mentioned that in 4 days' time, he will be 62. He does not qualify for anything at 62. In 11 days, however, I can take my ID card to my Trident ID card. Yes, I do have it, Senator. My Trident ID card to any of one of the registration offices, and they will write senior on that card, right? And when they put the word senior on the card, you know what that does? That it tells me to get on the bus. For free. For free, right? Get on the bus for free. So for those of us who are yet to get there, you know, I wish you God's blessings in getting up to that number. Even the way how we sit in this honorable house, you would realize that Senator Redmond is to my left, which means that I'm technically older than Senator Redmond. She did put the ball out there very early this morning, sir, you know, about her age and the fact that she qualified for being an older person. But there's a fundamental conversation to be had. And I always like to go into left field in these conversations. Because the reality for us is, as I look around the table here today, sir, there are some senators who are sitting here with us to whom it will take almost 40 years to probably get to my age. That's a long, long way to go, a very long way to go. They've got some decades to get up there, right? Not to say that I'm 68, by the way, but, you know, I'm just trying to calculate the youngest person in here versus my age, so almost 40 years. But the reality for us, though, is that we need to look at what really is the devil in the detail. So when you look at the legislation, and you see that we're trying to legislate for the elderly or the older person, and in recent times there was a conversation had about the youth. So when Senator Trim mentioned once a man, twice a child, in this house, and you look at the similarities in the legislation, we're trying to protect the two ends of the spectrum. We're talking about the youth and child abuse and trying to protect them, fines, all the rest of it. Then we go all the way up the ladder, sir, and we realize that we're trying to protect the other end. So what's in the middle? What's in the middle is really the question. What's in the middle? How are we going to try to protect the middle so that the middle does not do what the middle is currently doing? Because that's what we're trying to do. How are we going to try to protect them? And the reality is that there is a dilemma for us. That dilemma is founded in the fact that we have a society not aging towards anything. We have a society that has aged to a point where its care capacity is now beyond us. And we are trying to treat to that. We're trying to discuss that. We're trying to figure out how we will actually get there. And there are a number of things that are very, very obvious. As mentioned by many of my colleagues earlier today, why are we trying to protect the elderly as much as we are trying to protect the youth of the country? And it's because we have a middle band of Barbadians to whom we are saying are abusive. Why are they abusive on either end of the spectrum? We're talking about them being abusive because they're frustrated. Why are they frustrated? Because they look to their own future and realize that there's nothing in it for them as far as when we get up the road, what's going to be in it for us? What's going to be there for us when we get to being classified as an old person or a person in need of some form of protection. So we need to put things in place right now, in my opinion, that is not mentioned within the bill itself. The financial component of all of what we're talking about in the bill is absence. So when we talk about having to refurbish, having to train, having to do all of those nice things to protect and to aid and to help us down the road, as much as we need to help the children who are starting on their journey, those things are absent. There's some fundamental issues in there, and as I look around to the youth in Senate here with me today, I ask myself the question, how much insurance do they need to pay to get to a point down the road where they think that they're going to be comfortable? When they get to 65, 67, whatever it will be the pension age at that time, what would they have had to invest today to make it worthwhile for them down the road? And if you look at the maths associated with that, many of my colleagues today will move to poverty before they get old. They will move into poverty before they get old. Barbadian? No. Many of Barbados is moving into a street whereby we're moving into poverty as we get older. And it's not because of something that Barbados is doing. It's a fiscal issue that we need to be able to look at and address. The issue for us today is like, for example, insurance. If you go to buy an insurance policy today and you tell your rep or your broker, oh, I need to have a plan that when I get to 68 today, that I can live comfortably. Rep said, okay, how much you working for? And you say, oh, $6,000 a month, $7,000 a month. The rest of it, I don't know about that because your policy is going to be about $5,000 a month for the next 30 odd years. And that's a harsh reality. It means that you're strangled on that side of the fence. But then you're contributing to all sorts of other national schemes, national insurance, and all of these things where the actuaries are sitting down trying to do maths and do the calculations to understand the balance in terms of what it is we have to invest so that we can get to that particular point where we live comfortable or comfortably. The reality then for Barbados is how does it treat to an aged society? We would have, or we are on the verge of opening up the new geriatric hospital at the top of, what's that road called? It's going to have a private section for me, sir. But the reality for us, though, the reality for us is that I can almost stand here today and say that it does not have enough beds. Cannot have enough beds. Cannot have enough beds. So the reality then for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, despite having that up there, is that they will still be running a geriatric complex. Pretty much. And that's just the reality for us. So what we talk about abandonment and we talk about all the issues, those issues are still very, very much there for us today. The question for the country then is, how do we apply a fiscal incentive today that helps the country to manage this episode in a better way? Because we're doing a fantastic job right now, and we're trying to even do a better job. But how do we manage that number into the future? Which means that all the young folks here who will become older as life goes on need to be able to see what their horizon will look like. If they can see their horizon, I am sure that they may not be so frustrated and may not have taken out what they do today. Because when you tell a guy that at 40 years old who is still living home with his parent or his mother, you ain't achieved nothing, you ain't got nothing belong to you, there's nothing for you. All he can do, honestly, is try to get rid of his old mother out of the house so he can tell somebody got something. And that's just a reality that we find ourselves in. So we need to be able to think about those things. How are we going to treat to those matters? How are we going to be able to get there? And I'm saying that all the work that we do today, with all the great pieces of legislation that we've passed or will pass, need to be also inclusive, but inclusive from a fiscal perspective, where we understand the contributions to be made. What fiscal reforms can take place today that help to carry that burden, or help Barbadians to carry the burden of their aged parents? I don't have that burden. My mother passed a few months ago, and she was the last. My father went along many, many years ago. So I today don't have that. But if I was to look into my own household, I have an older sister, I have an older brother, I have all of these kind of dynamics going on. So there is still a reality in there. So we must have fiscal reform at the end of the day that supports that carry. And whether that fiscal reform is speaking to what we do on income tax reform, do we give benefits to people who take care of the elderly family? Can they now get an allowance in that fiscal space to help contribute or help to offset that? That is very important. Doctors' bill, fees, everything goes up today. Insurance companies are running in the opposite direction, and we have to accept that because, again, our demographic isn't growing. The population is too small. The maths don't work for us. And these are harsh realities that we need to find. And all these are the things that are really, at the end of the day, contributing significantly to the pressures that we have. And we need to be able to understand what those pressures are, sir, so that we can help to move those things forward. We have to put something in place, sir, from a fiscal perspective that helps the average household in Barbados understand that the government can't be everything to everybody. And the reality is that they have to be in a position where they can support their elders, the older people in and around them. And we also got to understand how that works at the end of the day. Yes, as Senator Trim mentioned, and it was mentioned earlier, the whole issue of the extended family, that's no longer present because the extended family, long gone the days of significant amounts of people in a family. Families today are just 1 or 2 kids, and then they go away. They don't return to Barbados. So that whole concept is gone. So we need to be able to look at how we're going to actually be able to move that forward. The community is not the community, and it will not be the community as we understand it to be, so it doesn't make any sense to be harping on what a community looks like and what the community of the good old days. I'm a tongue rat. I'm a tongue rat. So I gotta say that, right? I know that Senator Walker is also a tongue rat. Just like some other people are also all tongue rats, right? Tongue rat again, tongue rat. Just backside road. Right? So there is no other way to describe it. You agree with me, Senator Walker? No other way to describe it. We are all tongue rats, right? But the reality for the tongue rat was the community in which the tongue rat lived. Okay? And that's the difference. Those days are gone. Chapman Lane don't exist anymore. Gabby lived at the road when he sang Emerton. He was one of the people that moved. So, those things don't exist anymore. So we got to understand what will be the new paradigm for us in terms of a community, how we will actually move to helping others within that space. And the reality, it comes back at the end of the day, it all comes back to money. It all comes back to an economic equation. And we've got to be able to work to that economic equation so that it makes sense at the end of the day. Whether or not this bill is passed today, and what's going to be different tomorrow. It ain't going to be nothing different tomorrow for that girl or that woman or whoever that has to care for the elderly. It isn't going to be any different tomorrow because the vast majority of people I would like to think are doing good. It's the minority of people that we're legislating against, the ones who abuse this and abuse that. But the vast majority of people, in my humble opinion, sir, are actually doing good. So we got to see how we can support them, how we can give them more money at the end of the day so that it meets to what it is that we are looking at in terms of the future. Barbados, as I said before, is a very aged society. It is not our birth rate has settled that equation for us, and even with migration and everything else and bringing people into Barbados, it still is going to take us another 10, 20 years before it could do anything at all with those statistics. So we must look at today, and we must look at how we put things in place, sir, to actually be able to move forward. I think the bill was a little silent when it comes to that particular area, but, you know, I could live with the silence in a way, but it still remains a conversation, because all of what is required today requires somebody to make an investment, whether it is private or otherwise, into helping the aged population as we move forward. So that is going to be very, very important for us. We need to understand that we have a fractured traditional model now that is completely fractured, and we can't speak to it and hold on to it dearly, sir, as though it's going to come again. Those days are effectively gone. We need to understand that the females of this country will continue to play the leading role in the nurturing of families within this country. It is a very sad statistic, but when I heard on the news, I think it was this morning, that in another place and on another forum, we lost over 240 odd males, young men, over the last 5 years to gun violence. It speaks to what's going to happen to the females. They've got to carry it. You know, the men are dropping out the race. Maybe they dropped out a long time ago in some regards, but they have to continue to carry it. And that's just the reality first. So how do we support them in that particular effort is critical to the exercise. I am concerned, like everyone said, about the increasing abandonment of elderly within the society. But as we said before, it could be born out of frustration. 9 out of 10 times it is probably born out of frustration, but it's important that we understand how do we now get those caregivers not to be so frustrated that they will, for all intents and purposes, maintain a sort of a good working relationship with their elders in their communities and their households. So this is going to be very, very important for us as we go forward. So I would like to think, sir, that the bill being a strong bill as far as correcting or trying to manage an evil in society, which is what it seeks to do, is a little bit light in terms of how we move forward in the argument of ensuring that it does not continue to be perpetuated. And to me, one of the hurdles in there is to ensure that there is some economic space within all of what we're talking about to help to move it forward. We've got to be able to think about how those people that have these care facilities can meet the hurdles of repairs, upgrades. We've got to think about the next geriatric hospital probably down the road. We've got to think about that. Do we need a old people's village? I know many years ago it was called the Seroptimist, and we led the charge for the Seroptimist village, and that was something that was put together as a private sort of way to help an aging population. That's now outlived its tenure in the grand scheme of things. Do we build another one of those? So we have to be able to move that forward. So we've got to work towards building out these communities, and we can't hide from it. It's going to cost. It's going to cost us a lot of money to be able to move these things forward. Otherwise, the symptoms that we have today will continue to be the symptoms first. So, in closing, I would like to commend the bill writers for putting together the bill. I understand what it is that the bill is trying to do as far as protection of the elderly, so it speaks to that completely. But more importantly, it remains light on the finance side, and we need to have that tough conversation about how we are going to do what it is that we need to do, sir, as we move forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nels. Senator Benjamin.
Mr. President, I rise this afternoon to throw my full support behind this Older Persons Care and Protection Bill 2026. I listened intently to the debate in this honorable chamber, and I must admit that I was a little disappointed with some of the takes. And I say that, sir, because I feel as though from listening to some of the contributions, we have sought to simplify the bill that is before us, to almost water it down to a question of, what has society become? But in my review of the bill, what I in fact see is this bill shaping and giving support beyond that. Mr. President, I want to share something that is deeply personal to me. I grew up in an extended family, extended to the point of my maternal grandmother living with us. And for as long as I can recall, she lived with dementia and Alzheimer's. And as a result of that, I came to understand these diseases well. I commend my parents for their steadfastness in her care, but we came to a point where my parents could no longer offer her the care and support that was needed. And as a result, as a family, we tried to figure out, well, what would be the best place to take my grandmother. Willing to pay for the care, but we just wanted to ensure that she had the best possible care. And at that time, it was so hard to know what kind of care each facility would provide. And we love her dearly, so obviously we wanted to ensure that she would have the best possible care. We moved from home to home, speaking to the care providers in each home, and eventually we settled on one. And I don't want to say, but I feel forced to say that we lived to regret the decision. Eventually, we received a call to say, well, she's going to be taken to the hospital. And I have to interject also to say there was not a day missed by my mother going to that home to visit my grandmother. But we received a call that she was being taken to the hospital. And upon arrival, we were taken into a room and shown a bed sore that was at the latest stage. And this is a home that it was not a government facility. This is a home that we paid for and that we would go every day and visit, but we didn't know the signs. We didn't know what to look for. And so in my mind, this bill is critical because it's going to protect other Barbadians who are in similar positions to what we face. When I look at the bill, it says, homes must now be registered. And there's a process to go through to ensure that you meet the requirements. And if you don't meet the requirements, you can be taken off of the register. This is huge. And it is much bigger than, what have we become as a society. Mr. President, we later learned that that same home had a death where a resident fell over a balcony. So these bills will also protect from that because it will have a committee, for example. The bill speaks to a committee who will be made up of a representative from the residents, a representative of the agency, and it may include a member of the public. And I want to speak a little bit on the may include a member of the public, because I want to lend my support to say that it shall. I am suggesting that it shall include a member of the public, just to make sure that there is sufficient transparency, because that residential facility committee is responsible for ensuring that a number of things are done and are done well. So if you look at section 22 of the bill, it speaks to the committee being tasked with ensuring the protection of older persons within a residential facility. They're tasked with ensuring that the manager facilitates interaction between the residents, their families, the public, and the committee. They're tasked with ensuring that the manager provides services of an acceptable quality. They will be also tasked with ensuring that the space is fit for purpose. And had that particular home space been fit for purpose, the likelihood is that that particular resident would not have been able to fall over a balcony because it would be of a requisite height, for example. So I lend my full support to this bill, and I see it way beyond the scope of what have we become as a society, and I see it more as a protector of the elderly. And just to be clear, Mr. President, I don't raise what I've raised for any form of pity, but rather to show how broad this bill truly is and how necessary this bill is. I listened to Senator Trim as well when she touched on the care facilitators, and I want to speak a little bit on that, Mr. President. When we speak of abuse, previously it was not defined. This legislation, this bill, seeks to define it and to define it well. The older Barbadians that we are speaking of in this legislation are the people who built this country with their bare hands, Mr. President. They're the people who are living in, but they're still the people who are living in fear, in isolation, with neglect, and in indignity. In silence, seniors being financially exploited, older persons being left abandoned in hospitals, and Senator Cummings said it very well in her experience. But there are equally families that are drowning emotionally with the care that they're trying to give. They want to give the best care, but it is hard. It is something that unless you have lived it, you will not understand it. But for far too long, these realities have remained hidden because we are still a very prideful society. And we are still a society where we deal with things within our homes and we're not willing to talk about it publicly. So this bill provides an opportunity for people to share their stories and to not feel as burdened and to recognize that they're not alone in the fight. Mr. President, the care economy is one of the most important, but yet the least recognized sector of modern economies. Care work includes raising children. It includes the support of persons with disabilities. It includes domestic work, elder care, emotional support, and the countless forms of unpaid labor that sustain families and communities. And as Senator Trim said, much of this work, not all, but much is often performed by women who do it without compensation. And given my trade union background, I also have to make the point that these are working women, oftentimes, and sometimes in situations where the workplace is not willing to give them any ease. So they're not willing to allow the flexi time, or they're not willing to allow persons who work from home comfortably during COVID, all of a sudden the workplace can no longer accommodate them. And these are conversations that we continue to have at the Barbados Workers Union with employers, and we will continue to push. But using this platform, I want to encourage employers to understand the heavy weight that comes with caregiving, and that in circumstances where you can support an employee who wants to work or who has to work, to allow them the flexibility to be able to do so in circumstances where it can be accommodated. Mr. President, following the experience with my grandmother, my sister, who has a vested interest and love for the elderly, she started a free report writing system where persons who had complaints at homes could engage her services for free to write those reports. And so it is with great joy that in reading the bill, I recognize that there is a section that speaks to the need for reporting. And so I support that wholeheartedly. And I just want to make the point, however, that in reading the bill, I did not notice a time frame for the reports being actioned. And I hope that that is something that the regulations, perhaps, that are to come will be able to address. Mr. President, I particularly welcome the bill's emphasis on preserving the dignity and the community connection. From the experience we had with my grandmother, we were able to recognize that when she was around others, even if she could not understand or relate, her spirit was free. She was in a good mood, she would sing, she would dance. And I know that that's not unique to her. And so sometimes you have to allow the older people to go into environments that they are familiar with, and we must not seek to strip them from those environments unless we really believe that we have to. And so the way that this bill is framed is something that I wholeheartedly support, because it keeps the dignity intact and it recognizes that though things have changed, it does not mean that we need to completely change the individual. Aging should not, therefore, automatically mean institutionalization, and this bill makes that point very clearly. Many elderly Barbadians wish to remain independent for as long as possible. They wish to remain within their communities, their churches. The church is a big support, oftentimes, of the elderly, and they wish to remain within family environments. And that is exactly why the provisions concerning the home-based care within the bill are so important. The bill requires that caregivers receive adequate training, and it establishes a register of caregivers providing home-based care. Mr. President, I also welcome the provisions regulating the residential facilities. And I want to make the point that I did not see it within the bill, but I'm also hoping that as the regulations come, we speak more clearly towards the ratio of the caregiver to the individuals in the home. We need to make sure that they can in fact receive that kind of individualistic care that is required in these circumstances. Mr. President, as a younger member of this honorable chamber, I also believe that my generation has a special responsibility in this debate. We must reject wholeheartedly the dangerous culture that measures human value only by productivity. A society that honors only youth, speed, consumption, and economic output will eventually forget its humanity. And I want to remind young people like myself that the elderly are not disposable. Because we don't see the economic value anymore does not mean that we can cast them aside. And I say that deliberately because there's a dangerous tendency in modern societies to treat human beings as valuable only while they're economically productive. And therefore, once people become slower, frailer, more dependent, or expensive to care for, society quietly pushes them to the sidelines. But I remind my colleagues in my age group that the people that we are now calling elderly are the very people who carried us. They are the ones who built this country before there was widespread technology. They're the ones that were there before the modern infrastructures. And it is because of many of our forefathers that we have the opportunities that we now take for granted. In my view, Mr. President, the question before us is not whether older persons deserve protection. The question is whether Barbados is prepared to organize itself as a caring society. And I recognize that this legislation aligns with the broader national direction that this government has already committed itself to. So if you look at our contracts, the 2026 manifesto, we spoke about the fact that we are a rapidly aging population, and we committed to expanding the protections that will support and protect senior citizens. And I believe that this bill gives legislative and institutional substance to that broader vision. Because caring for older persons cannot simply be treated as charity or crisis management. It has to be something that we consider as national development planning. And if Barbados is to truly become a modern social democracy, then the care economy must be treated as essential national infrastructure, just as important as we see roads and schools and port and hospitals, we must see our older citizens. Finally, Mr. President, I want us to remember something very simple. Every older person we are speaking about in this debate is somebody's mother. Certainly it refers to mine because they fall within this category. Somebody's father, somebody's grandmother, someone who once held a frightened child, somebody who worked, somebody who sacrificed, and somebody who loved this country enough to help build it. And one day, if we, well, some of us are already fortunate enough, but if I am fortunate enough to live a long life, I too will become vulnerable. And I too may one day depend on the compassion and the integrity and the humanity of others. And I would be grateful when I reach that stage that there's such a bill as this, one that will protect me and care for me when I do become vulnerable. So essentially, Mr. President, what I'm saying is that this bill is not just about older persons, but in fact, it's about all of us. My grandmother deserved dignity, and every elderly Barbadian deserves that same dignity. No elderly person in this country should spend their final days afraid. No family should have to wonder whether their loved one is safe behind the walls of a care facility. No caregiver, certainly, should be so overworked and unsupported that they cannot provide the standard of care for which they were placed to provide. So while this bill cannot erase every injustice that has ever occurred, nor can it erase every painful experience that we've lived, I can say clearly and unequivocally that Barbados, by even drafting this bill, is refusing to look away. We are determined to treat to our older persons with the care and the dignity that they deserve. For those reasons, Mr. President, I stand in full support of this Older Persons Care and Protection Bill of 2026, and I commend it to this chamber.
Thank you very much, Senator Benjamin. Senator Andrew Maladu.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be as brief as possible. Don't have a lot to contribute to this. First of all, I would like to say that I support the objectives of this bill. Secondly, I think it has not been left unsaid that this bill is a major expansion of the state's powers. Often the state has had these powers over children, but not so much over the elderly people. But the key question that this comes down to, Mr. President, for me is enforceability. We already have an existing law that regulates senior citizens' homes, and this is just an expansion of that into the health services regulations and talks about elder abuse, home care, etc. So I completely support the bill, but just a couple of thoughts as to how perhaps it could have been improved. I'm a little bit concerned about the protecting due process and privacy that has been in here. An allegation alone should not permanently damage a person's reputation as a result of falling under this bill. An allegation alone is not enough. I think we've got to be careful on how much intrusive powers that we make into the elderly, except in genuine emergencies, things that warrant access and searching their devices and so on. We've got to be careful with these things. And we do not wish to damage genuine, responsible, private care providers. So let me just deviate for a second. You see, many people who've spoken before me, everyone comes from their own circumstances, and Mr. President, my circumstances, as I remember within my family, elder people being cared for, they were cared for in our home. The last thing that happened was that they would end up to be provided for in some type of a care home, because that was the family I grew up in, is that we kept them as home as long as possible. In fact, I know that my mom and dad, who are one is well into their 90s and one almost there, their one thing that they keep saying to me, and I'm sure that many people around here share this, is they want to spend the time in their home. They don't want to spend their last days in one of these facilities. So my experience is different. But I want to be practical and just point out perhaps one thing, sir, in using my couple of minutes, in this bill that worries me about the practicality of a lot of the things that we do. And sir, I want to point out especially Part 6, Section 22 of the bill, which is headed Establishment of Residence Committees for Residential Facilities. When we look into some of the details of these bills, that particular detail says that the board, well, a board is to be established in each one of these, and there is to be a representative from the social care, can't remember exactly what it's called, on that board. I don't know how many of these facilities there are in Barbados, but my little Google search tells me that it's somewhere close to 100 of them. Now, if that board at each of those facilities was to meet a reasonable amount of time, maybe once a quarter, sir, to review what's going on there, that is 100 meetings every quarter, and we have to provide for this. So when I talk about the practicality of these things, that is what I'm referring to, because, and I'm going to end on this, I've stood in here now, this is my 5th year of the 2nd term of the Senate, and I participated in a number of debates on pieces of legislation. Some of them I did not, but I'll point out 3 of them today. Sir, do you know that we have laws in Barbados that make it illegal to ride in the back of an open back van? Sir, I cannot find any time that that has been enforced at all. And I'm sure it was debated at length in here with great people, and I'm sure that that law had made a lot of sense. And it's not enforced. Sir, I know about helmets on bicycles. You're meant to wear helmets on bicycles. I certainly make sure that my children, when they're riding bicycles, wore helmets, and I myself wore helmets. But I see it every day. I see people don't wear helmets, and we don't enforce that law either. Again, it has been debated at great length in here for good reason. But sir, let me come to the next and most recent one, and my most recent experience with it. Do you remember, sir, how much time we spent talking about the law to have no kite with a bow beyond sunset at night? Oh my gosh, sir. I had occasion to spend Easter weekend on Brighton Beach in a little apartment there. It wasn't a matter of not being able to sleep on the evening and enjoy. You couldn't even hear yourself talk during the day. What are we passing all of these laws for if we don't enforce them? So, at the end of the day, I shall finish on this. As I said, I support this bill completely. But this bill is not where the work ends, it's where the work starts. We must not pass an unenforceable promise for our elderly people. We must support them, but the rights on paper must be matched by the capacity and the safeguards and the accountability within the government departments. And I have been admonished at times, sir, by members from the other side, that we are a legislature and we don't enforce things in here. But I won't call them members by name, as I've been asked to do from the other side. That would be not responsible of me to do that. What I will say, sir, is that it is absolutely true that as an independent senator, and most everyone on this side, we don't have the opportunity to actually implement this law. But you do. You all do. And the people of Barbados are going to hold you responsible for not just passing the law here today on a piece of paper, but actually to enforce these things. And we must put the resources behind the departments that are needed to enforce this bill. With those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Malado. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So, over the course of the last few hours, since this morning, we have heard a number of honourable members of the Senate rise and speak on this bill, and I want to first of all thank every honourable member for their contribution on the bill. There were some solid points that were raised, and I want to give you the assurance that where there is merit, that those comments will revert to the substantive agencies with responsibility. In the main, the SEA, Social Empowerment Agency, as a related ministry, as captured in the section of the legislation that speaks about the Interministerial Coordination Committee, which must by necessity include my own ministry for health, because there are a number of pieces of enforcement that fall under this legislation that actually are not covered by the legislation, and which is why when I say it is important, whatever your training is, when you come to Parliament, Parliament is an entirely new creature. It is a new discipline, and there are rules and structures that you may or may not have encountered anywhere else before you came into this place. And the way in which legislation is drafted and how it is dealt with by the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who is not just a lawyer, but a trained legislative drafter with experience in drafting, is that it has to be compared and contrasted to the Constitution, other pieces of existing legislation, other regulatory frameworks that may be in place so that there is coherence. And usually they are also all meant to be read together. If you read a single piece of legislation in this country in isolation or in a vacuum, you will not have a full portrait of it. And that is the first thing that I would want to say. And so the Ministry of Health has a role to play. There are pieces that fall already under legislation governed by the Ministry of Health that speak to how to treat to residential facilities and a registration of health facilities and inspection of those facilities. The piece of legislation is titled the Health Services, Private Hospitals, Nursing Homes, Senior Citizens Homes, and Maternity Homes Regulations, and it's a 2005 piece of legislation, Cap 44. So that is what the substantive monitoring and enforcement of private facilities will be covered by, and not this piece of legislation in a vacuum. I would want to make sure that Barbados is guided by fact and by the context so that they're not misled unintentionally. So, Mr. President, also as I move on, I wanted to also point out that, perhaps to reiterate, that across all of the legislation to which I have just made reference, in every single sector, you will always see reference to the minister. It does not mean the minister is going out and inspecting or deregistering or any of those things. The system of governance requires that the office of the minister, which is on the advice of technical officials, is the office that makes those decisions. And I take the point just made by Senator Malalou about the volume of enforcement obligations that this legislation imposes. But it is no different than, for example, the Barbados Tourism Products Authority Act, which covers tourism products and ensures that there has to be inspection of those products in order to make sure that they're fit for purpose. That is done not by, again, the minister, even though it is the minister. It is done by a range of agencies, including the fire service, including the environmental health officials. All of those persons constitute the approval then given to the minister, and the enforcement in this fashion equally applies as it relates to these nursing facilities privately operated. And I want then also to speak to the framing as to where it came from, the legislation came from. The overall policy on aging, which we debated in this chamber some time ago, this is the policy that has informed this piece of legislation. And it's drawn from our local context, yes, but it's also drawn, I mentioned best practice internationally earlier, but it is also drawn from international frameworks. The UN General Assembly on the 18 Principles Supporting National Aging Policies, the Brasilia Declaration on Aging, the Political Declaration and Madrid Plan of Action on Aging, the World Health Organization Active Aging Policy Framework, and a decade of healthy aging areas of action. It also includes a number of other, not necessarily UN-driven or multilateral-driven, but global best practice frameworks and policies. And they include the International Federation on Aging Declaration of Rights and Responsibilities of Older Persons, the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights of Older Persons, that's a 2015 instrument, the Caribbean Charter on Health and Aging adopted by CARICOM, the Montreal Declaration on the International Federation of Aging for the UN, and the Barbados Guidelines on the development of a national policy on aging developed by the ad hoc committee. There was also an earlier paper, a green paper in particular, on a national policy on aging that was approved by Cabinet. So this is not something that just came out of nowhere. It was thoroughly researched, extensively consulted on, informed by both national and international considerations, and then framed into a policy that then was put into a draft bill. The bill that you see before us on the protection of older persons, prevention from abuse, reporting obligations, and all of those other things that you've seen here, but all meant to be taken together with existing pieces of legislation governing various aspects of it, and all administered by the Interministerial Committee. Now, I especially want to associate myself with the comments that were made by everyone who, I think Senator Benjamin made the point, every older person in this country is somebody's aunt, they're somebody's grandmother, they're someone's father or their mother, they're a loved one, somebody who took in a Barbadian youngster when they didn't have anywhere else to go and they grew up in their house. Those are the older persons in this community that we're all talking about. Many of us in here in this room may not be in a position that in 12 days we can go and get senior put on our ID card, but we all think, but we either have lost a loved one. My grandmother passed a few months ago. She was 93 years old. I have no remaining grandparents, actually. All of my grandparents have now passed on. But all of us are at a stage, and certainly my friends and I are talking all the time about how we're now finally at this age where we're thinking about aging parents, thinking about making sure our parents are always cared for and protected. And I agree with Senator Benjamin when she says about the strain that it places on families and parents. Yes, there are some indifferent people that exist. We know that. There are those who have abandoned for abandon's sake. There are those that have abandoned, we know, for wickedness' sake. But there are the majority who, for whatever reason, have had and taken the decision, I said it earlier, to be cruel, to be kind, because they know what it is to have to look after a parent or an older person, and they feel as though the safest and the best place, rather than leaving them in the house. My mother came home and told me yesterday about a case where this older member of a family, she goes and she looks after my mother. You know, people who grew up in the school system, that's my mother. And she always, I used to call her, she used to like to bring home strays. And so everybody would grow up in my house. And now she's older, she no longer brings home little children, she looks after older people. And so every month, I can guarantee I have things or she has things that she has to buy because she has somebody to go and give these things to. Somebody who needs help at Christmas. Trust and believe there are all of these things that's the nature of older people in our society as well. And she said to me, she went to visit with an older lady yesterday afternoon after she left church. Because you know the older ladies, they go to church together during the middle of the week, and then they go and they have their thing. So she went to visit with this older lady. She has one child. The child lives on her own. She's grown. And she lives by herself because she wants to be in her home, that familiar space that she is accustomed to. But the daughter has had to disconnect the stove from in the house because she has a neurological illness, and so she does not always remember when she's turned it on. And so to keep her safe, the daughter has had to disconnect the stove in the house. But it means that someone has to go and take food for her. So granddaughter, my mother was telling me, goes every day when she leaves work and takes lunch and eats her lunch with her. And the people who live in the community, it is a close-knit community. The neighbors who live next door live there all their lives, and they know her all their lives, and they look out for her too. So she's in her home, but the community and her family, they're looking after her. But it's hard. It's not the easiest thing, and they can't afford to put her in a residential care. So they had to depend on their own capabilities and the community to support. So this is where I started when I opened this bill. This is about families, supporting families, and doing right by their elders. This is also about the community rallying around their elders. I think about, we talked about earlier about persons who, when they're discharged from a tertiary care institution, what we call acute care, post-acute care. Now, I don't want to talk politics in this, but this Barbados Labour Party government, a few weeks ago, short weeks ago, in February, when we were campaigning, we talked about making sure that Barbados has the benefit of step-down facilities, to make sure we had the ability of constructing and maintaining a rehabilitation facility in this country, so that when persons leave the hospital, I've talked about this before, many of us have personal stories. My father has advanced Parkinson's. And every time he has an incident and he has to be taken into the hospital, he lives in New York, so he's there. Every time he leaves, he has to be put into a facility, because when you are in the bed for any period of time, he has to then get back his mobility. They put him in a step-down facility adjacent to his hospital, where every single day The physiotherapist go in and they work with him. The occupational therapists go in. When he is discharged and he goes back home, he then has the benefit, and the hospital ordered this lift to help him. He has 2 nurses that are in the house every day that look after him. And if he needs assistance, he also has the physiotherapist that goes in how many other days a week, and the occupational therapists are also going. Here in Barbados, unless you have the means to be able to support that privately, it's very difficult to be able to have access to step-down care and ongoing in-house care. That's notwithstanding that there is the National Assistance Boards and the home health care. That's a different type of care that we're talking about. We're talking about specialist care. And so this government, our government, made a commitment that Barbados should have and will have a rehabilitation facility, and we're committed still to seeing that come to fruition. We also made a commitment that for persons who are at end of life, that they have the ability to go home if they so choose and have access to hospice care where they can transition with dignity. And we've also made a commitment in collaboration with the third sector to be able to see that happen. So I agree with all of the sentiments that were raised by the honourable senators. As a government, we see them, we hear them, we agree with those concerns. We accept that there's some work that still needs to be done to be able to enforce the bill, but also to be able to ensure that, yes, Senator Malalu, this is a start, but not the end, but we have a considerable body of work still to do. But I want to be clear when I say that I agree with you, that this is not just about the government taking these actions. This is about all of us. In the same way that mommy will leave home and will go and look after somebody, in the same way that this ministry responsible for aging and responsible for our elders has launched the One Family program to look after the most vulnerable, and their programs to support children, and we are asking Barbadians to support young people and to support families. I am equally saying that this is not just a bill about the government, but this is about a bill where Barbadians in their individual capacity can support others in their community, elders this time, older persons who need it. Let's not be that society that just looks after our own. We talk about it used to take a village to raise a child. I still think it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to support our elders. It takes a village to support the caregivers of our elders, because sometimes it's really, really hard for caregivers who have to look after their elders. Let this be a step change for Barbados. Let this be an evolution of how we see who we are, and let this be an opportunity for Barbadians, wherever they are, who have not visited their elders for a long time in any of the facilities that I spoke about when I opened my comments, make the effort. Their spirits can be lifted just by seeing you, hearing your voice, knowing that someone cares about them. Let this bill be an indication that Barbados, caring for our people, caring for each other, from our children to our elderly, let us say collectively, this is who we are. I beg to move, Mr. President, that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolves itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair, and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable Senate is now in committee.
Madam Deputy President, may I take the bill in parts?
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 4.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 to 7.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 7 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 7 do now stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? No? Senator Goodrich.
Thank you, ma'am. I just wanted to state there that in clause 2, where I would have alluded to the fact that there is a section that says fit persons mean a person approved by the minister to care for older persons, that we have a clearly defined definition of a fit person.
What section are we?
You're going to get married for phone.
That's all the interpretation. Oh, I missed that.
Honourable senators, I would suggest that you follow the debate so that if you have an objection to raise, there's something that you are not in agreement with, that you want to challenge in some way, when that section is called and you're asked, all honourable senators in favour say aye, you say aye. If you're against, you say no, and you get up and articulate the point that you want. So we have already passed the clause to which you are referring, because we are now at part 2. Part 2, clauses 5 to 7. So we cannot now reopen, and I waited when we were at part 1, and there were no objections raised from the floor. So I'm going to wait for the clerk to take us to part 3.
I didn't hear.
You have the mic on.
Did you pass that?
Yeah. She got to put the question. Just let her know to put the question across.
President, please put the question from part 2.
I did already.
You did? Okay.
It passed?
For clarity, I'll do so. Okay.
Clauses 8 and 9.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 8 and 9 do stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 8 and 9 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 10 to 15.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 10 through 15 do now stand part.
Make your comment. Make your comment. She's not objecting, she's making a comment. Speaking on the clauses.
Yes, ma'am. I'm speaking on section 10, the clause 10, sorry, ma'am. The $100,000 fine and/or 5 years imprisonment seems to be a troubling trend to criminalize inadvertent behavior, thereby making everyone guilty. So if the punishments are to be onerous, then the crime must be explicitly defined with no room for misinterpretation. And that's my comment there.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 10 to 15 do now stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 16 and 17.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 16 and 17 do now stand part.
Yes, ma'am, in terms of section, clause 16.
Senator Goodrich.
Thank you, ma'am. As you know, I'm new, ma'am, so thank you for that. Clause 16, 3 and 4. The manager is given 14 days to provide reasons opposing the minister's decision. However, to whom does the manager appeal? It is not stated. However, it may be the same minister who gave the first decision. If that is so, then the appeal process appears to be farce.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy President. I would just want to suggest, if it is that there are comments to be made on the legislation, I believe that that may have been done in the second reading speeches, but if there are recommendations to the text, and there are changes to the text and language that will be being proposed, that's what would happen in this incarnation. But just rising to give a comment on a text at this stage, I'm not clear I understand what is intended by the Honourable Senator.
Ma'am, at this point, I can comment on the clauses and make recommendations, and that is what my intention is. So, I would recommend that it stated clearly to whom the manager appeals to, and that's my recommendation, ma'am.
I think that section 50 does allow the honorable senator to make comments, but to just make a comment without a specific recommendation or a challenge or a request that the language be taken back to the substantive ministry for review does not necessarily advance the honorable senator's case. So I am just trying to advise or suggest what is the best way, but you can, at this stage, make a comment on the section if you wish. The rules, section 50 does allow that under the standing orders. Can we then move on?
Put the question, please. Let's pass it.
So the question is, part 4, section, clauses 10 through 15 do now stand part. All honorable senators have...
Part 5, clauses 16 and 17.
Oh, beg your pardon.
16 and 17.
Beg your pardon. The question is that part 5, clauses 16 and 17 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Mr. Jones, call it.
Next part. Part 6, clauses 18 to 32.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that part 6, clauses 18 through 32 do not stand part.
The question is that part 6, clauses 18 through 32 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Will all honorable senators against please say no?
Part 7, clause 33.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that part 7, clause 33 do now stand part.
The question is that part 7, clause 33 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 34 to 36.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that part 8, clauses 34 through 36 do now stand part.
The question is that part 8, clauses 34 through 36 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 37 to 40.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that part 9, clauses 37 through 40 do now stand part.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I just have a question concerning the part 9, section 37. Is requiring a person to disclose passwords not in conflict with the section 37.7, where the person need not say anything which may incriminate himself or expose him to a criminal charge, penalty, or forfeiture? 37, subsection 7. 37, subsection 4, B.
37, 4B and 37?
37, 7, ma'am.
7, okay. I am waiting to hear the lawyers, but it seems to me that 37(4)B, as I understand it, says that the executive director or police officer may require, not mandatory, may require any person having charge of computer equipment, codes, etc., to disclose the passwords or any such codes or information. Whereas 37(7) says that you have a right not to incriminate yourself. So basically, it is the same thing that exists in any law now. A policeman can come up and say, you got a gun under your chair, and you say, Skipper, I ain't saying a word. Which is essentially what these two sections say, that the director or the police officer may ask for the codes or the passwords, and that and that's one section, 37(4)B, and then 37(7), it says basically, look, if you are a person who is guilty of anything, you have a right not to incriminate yourself. So you do not have to comply if it will lead to self-incrimination, which is basic criminal law. I haven't practiced law for many, many years, and criminal law for many, many, many years, but that seems to me to be a standard, a repetition of a standard legal principle. You have a right against self-incrimination, and the police have a right to ask you to give evidence, to speak, to tell the whole truth, and so on and so forth.
I don't have anything to add to what the Madam Deputy President just shared. It's very clear to me that one is speaking to a person not hampering an investigation, which is 37(4)B, and 37(7) is speaking to your right to not incriminate yourself. I don't see a challenge between the two.
Madam Chair, I've taken note of the comments made by Senator Goodrich and the responses proffered by yourself as well as Senator Benjamin. And at this point, on that basis, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 37 through 40 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, clauses 37 through 40 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 41 to 46.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 10, clauses 41 through 46 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 10, clauses 41 through 46 do now stand part.
Chair? I was standing, but I recognized you, didn't see me. So I just wanted to say, ma'am, in terms of section 41, a person is liable to be fined $10,000 and are imprisoned for 5 years for refusing to give access. And are imprisoned for 5 years for refusing to give access. This seems to be in conflict with the section 37(7), which seems to protect him from such penalties. So I seek your clarity, ma'am. That was section 41.
Is there only one?
That was 41.
It seems to me that there are three sections. 37, 4B notes or provides that the executive director or police officer may ask for specific types of information, data, or equipment. Full stop. Section 37(7) says, irrespective of any question posed, you are entitled not to incriminate yourself. Full stop. Section 41 says, but if you refuse or obstruct, if you refuse or obstruct or delay any authorized person from carrying out their duties, which of course would exacerbate any harm to a vulnerable or impacted person, then you are liable to be charged. And on conviction, you could be fined $10,000 or sent to prison for 12 months or both. So there are three definite and distinct steps which are not in conflict with one another and in fact are replicas of standard legal protections in criminal law that currently exist. The plot thickens. Honourable Senator, Senator Malulu, are you coming to her aid?
Thank you.
Or are you about to obstruct?
Thank you, Deputy President. I am reminded of the rules of debate, standing order number 31, and I just seek your clarity. It says very clearly here, a senator desiring to speak shall rise in place, and if called upon, shall address the chair. No senator shall speak unless called on by the chairman. I just am wondering, just for the good order, as we are going to be in this for a long time, this is how I would expect to proceed. That way I would know how to follow the debate. Am I correct, Madam Deputy President?
Honourable Senator Malulu, since this is not your first few days in the chamber, you got to follow the rules. But I think there is a cause for concern. It might be useful if all honourable senators reread the rules over the weekend. There is a certain amount of evidence of lack of familiarity with what the rules say. Today, for instance, there were people just getting up and starting to talk without being recognized, with other people on their feet. There were instances where somebody wanted to speak and was waving their hand rather than rising. You rise, and if two people rise at the same time, the chair will determine who gets the floor first. But the convention is that you rise. If the presiding officer happens to be looking down, you can say, Mr. President, or Honourable President, or Sir, or somebody may alert that there is a senator standing, because it is possible that you are looking down and reading and not seeing that a senator is asking for the floor. There are other infractions today, and I spoke to persons individually. I will not, therefore, repeat them on the floor, but there has to be some attempt to honor the traditions and the rules of the chamber and to follow the standing orders. We are not at liberty to rewrite them or to attack persons or to behave as if the rules do not apply to us. We must become familiar and we must observe them. And I am saying that for all members on all sides of the chamber. We press on. The schedule. The rest.
Madam Chair, I beg to move the schedule be the
Part
schedule.
10? Part 10. The question is that Part 10, clauses 41 to 46 do now stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Schedule. The schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule now be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Older Persons Care and Protection Act of 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Older Persons Care and Protection Act of 2026. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, order number 1, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the State Acquisition, Investing, or Property Bill 2026.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am going to be brief on this bill, but it is a significant bill and it benefits a significant number of people. The impact of the bill, although short, is significant. I think many of us are aware over many years that there are a number of persons who have lived and maintained homes and built families in many of our terraced estates. We call them housing areas, but terraced estates for the purpose of this bill. This bill today seeks to acquire and then vest those properties for the purpose of transferring ownership to the qualified tenants. They're currently owned by the National Housing Corporation, but ownership is meant to be transferred to qualified owners. The bill effectively does the following things. It provides a legislative mechanism to be able to transfer the ownership that I just mentioned by acquiring the properties first to the state in the public interest in pursuant to Section 16(4) of the Constitution, and then vesting those properties directly in the hands of qualifying tenants with good, marketable title free of encumbrances. Now, this is a critical piece of legislation that is being passed here today. A bill that is being passed for the purpose, Mr. President, of benefiting 3,892 eligible unit occupants to be able to have access to their properties. Under the current structure, the way in which this has gone on, there have been that number that I mentioned, close to 3,900 units that would have been eligible, but only 597 of them have had title transferred all of this time. And so what we want to be able to do, and we've heard it spoken about over an extended period of time, is bringing an end to the rent for life model that has existed in Barbados. You have rent, you've been living in the terrace units for 5 years, 10 years, 20, how many ever years, and you're renting forever and ever. In some instances, you've raised your families, their families have moved on, and you're still there in the same unit, paying rent. You are in good standing, but you are still a renter, and you do not own the asset that you have invested in. It is also allowing, Mr. President, for a class of Barbadians who in some instances may not always qualify for a mortgage separately. So we are converting that rent that they had paid for how many other years into an asset which they now own as almost a mortgage. And it allows, Mr. President, for the same way that many people have equity in a mortgage, they take that equity out, they go and they get a second mortgage on the basis of what they've done the first time. They go and they get money to borrow out of their mortgage and the equity to be able to expand their home, to build and to give and leave something to their generation. So it is also about unlocking economic opportunity through property ownership. So rent in perpetuity being transitioned into ownership and enfranchisement for low-income Barbadians. So, Mr. President, in 2013, the original legislative framework required each one of these units to be conveyed on a case-by-case basis, each one. And so you may have 12 units, 20 units, 100 units in a housing estate, and each one had to be transitioned individually. If anybody who has ever gone through a mortgage process, you know what the conveyance processing looks like and how long it takes. I remember going through 8 months or so, but that probably was because COVID came during that time. So I'm hoping that in more recent times that it has gotten better. But as a result of the administrative delays, high legal and technical compliance burdens, and oftentimes some people get fed up and just fire that and just look to move on. Many of these tenants, Mr. President, thousands of them, not hundreds, thousands of them have occupied these units for 20 plus years. Imagine living in a home for 20 plus years, paying rent continuously, yet you have no title or ownership over that asset. So this government, Mr. President, wants to make sure that we can bring an end to that. We want to be able to empower these persons to be able to use their homes as collateral. We want to be able to empower these persons to be able to fully invest in or transfer that property to their family members. We want to make sure that we're able to give people financial room to be able to invest because they now have an asset which they own. And so the objective of this bill is to deliver that tenure and with it, the dignity of ownership. Everybody wants to own a piece of the rock, to facilitate that wealth creation and intergenerational transfer. If you as a mother, you as an aunt, you live in the house and you want to transfer that property to your children, you want to leave it to somebody. We want to be able to empower Barbadians in that way. Community stability and investment. We want to make sure, Mr. President, that people feel as though there's a sense of ownership in the communities that they live in. They've been living there for 20 plus years. They've raised families there for however long, but they also want to make sure that people feel as if I am protective of this community because I own something. It isn't somebody else's, it belonged to me. And it also, from an administrative perspective, it also allows the NHC to be freed up to go and provide equal opportunities for even more persons that also are interested in providing housing, are interested in acquiring housing. So there's a two-step process as outlined in the bill. One, all of the properties are to be vested in the state without any further assurance, and then they're meant to be immediately vested in the tenants, and they're the qualified tenants, and that is outlined, Mr. President, in the schedule. The effect of the vesting in this way is that it allows for the title to be simple and absolute. It allows for the title to be free of all encumbrances, and all prior interests, including those previously held by the state, are removed. It also allows for us to reduce the conveyancing delays, to address issues of title defects. I know that the attorneys in the Ministry of Housing and Lands, they have been working through this for quite some time. And we had, just before the election, one small transfer taking place then, but this is a much larger tranche taking place. The eligibility criteria, I know many people will want to know, well, how do I qualify? Do I qualify? Is this applicable? Is this applicable to me? 20 years occupancy or the equivalent discharge of obligations, good financial standing, and compliance with structural and statutory requirements. It also allows for this bill to make sure that you can address the issues of covenants. What are the covenants? You have, the covenants deal with use for residential purposes only. So can you go and put a dance hall in the middle of your residential community? Covenants are put in place to make sure that you have protections for other residents. Maintenance standards, nuisance prevention, infrastructure prevention. Those are all things that are meant to be included in the restrictive covenants. Same thing for easements, common law applies in this instance. Now, which housing estates in particular will this bill be relevant to? Deacon's Farm, Grisette's, Ferniehurst, Silver Hill, Wotton, Wildy, Golden Acre, Gall Hill, and Bonnets. These are large communities that span from St. Michael to Christchurch to St. James. These are the things that are going to benefit people. And so, Mr. President, there is no burden on the beneficiaries. It is an intrastate transfer from NHC to the state. It allows for the benefits to be accrued to both the agency, and it allows, Mr. President, first and foremost, for us to deliver with this piece of legislation on the 2013 legislative intent of the vesting that was meant to take place there, where only 567 of over 3,900 took forever to be conveyed. With this piece of legislation, it is one fell swoop for all of them in one action. There's very little more that I can say, Mr. President, on this important bill to benefit people that will not be known to all. This is significant, this is beneficial to Barbadians, and it benefits some of the most vulnerable among us in some of the most densely populated communities. I beg to move, Mr. President, this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Well, you better do it now. Are there any speakers on this bill before we put the question? Right. You need to raise, I can't read anybody's mind. Senator Goodrich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am here, and it's always an honor and pleasure to see you sitting there. More than ever, sir.
Thank you, Senator Goodrich. I'm happy to hear Senator Goodrich. Thank you.
You know, Mr. President, we don't tell people the good things, right, until they're dead. We say it at the funeral, but I'm going to tell you that while I'm here, I appreciate you sitting in that seat, sir. So, sir, I rise today to discuss the State Acquisition and Vesting of Property Bill of 2026. And I must say that this bill is quite an important bill because we know the housing issues in Barbados, and we know the cries of many Barbadians where they have stated that they were on the list for so long. So this bill does not only just bring a practical answer and solution to the long-standing issues that many Barbadians have faced, but it will cement the fact that persons who are waiting for so long will now become homeowners. And that gives those people a sense of security. And sir, this is a bill that really and truly should have been implemented, I reckon, ever since. So I am commending this bill, and I'm saying this is a good initiative because it gives people collateral. It gives them a sense of security, and they don't have to be limited by the fact that they don't have formal title. So yes, I'm saying great things about this bill, and I have to say, sir, that it could have been something that was passed even before elections so that no Barbadian will look at this and say that it's being used to be weaponized in any form or fashion. So, sir, this bill is one which appears to facilitate the title to properties into those persons who would have rightfully qualified under Section 4, subsection 2 of the said bill. So, of course, sir, many Barbadians now who would have wanted to own a piece of the rock would be able to celebrate and say, yes, I own a piece of the rock now once this bill is passed. And it shows, yes, that we are going in the right direction as a country, because we know that such a bill was really for the benefit of the low-income owners of society. And this is not something new. The late David Thompson would have talked about this eons ago, right? So I still use that as a reference to say, look, finally we have come to that place where we are in the Senate now, having a great discussion on this piece of legislation. Now, sir, I have to say that, of course, as we're looking at the bill, I will still speak and say, look, there is still a possible harm that people may query. And that possible harm may be, are we at the place where we're saying that every person, because I just heard Minister Lisa Cummings said it was 392 eligible persons, right? People just want to be convinced that those who are deserving of these properties are the ones who will be getting it. Because we always hear this saying, look, you don't want to take bread out of poor people's mouth. So my thing is that the persons who rightfully deserve it are the ones who should rightfully have the property. Because there is some anecdotal evidence that some persons might have paid, say, $20 or $30 per rent to individuals, but the persons obviously who paid this rent did not live in the house. Instead, they probably put people in the house, and then they demanded profit of a rent. I didn't want to forget that point. So these are things that happen here in our society, where the persons who will be rightfully entitled are the ones that perhaps sometimes will be displaced. And we don't want that, so we want to ensure that there's transparency, where people would know, look, in terms of this bill being passed, we look at all pre-legislative factors, we commend the bill, yes, and say, yes, finally, Barbadians will become homeowners, persons who are on the list for so long. But at the end of the day, when considering such a bill, there are things that we must keep in mind. And I have here, sir, the bill may be easily improved to ensure that some persons are not rewarded for any past bad behavior, where we are people that will come here and say we cement a wrong. As I made the point, we cannot cement a wrong because the youth are looking at us. And when I speak of cementing a wrong, I'm looking at the fact that those who are deserving of these properties should be the ones who are in it. And if we pass a piece of legislation, of course, we are not just passing a piece of legislation to right any wrong of the past. And I want to make that point clear. So I want to state that we should require each applicant to state just two things in their application: when they started renting the unit and what was their gross monthly earning at the time. The Minister of Housing could be able to verify that in terms of verifying the date that they started renting, and the Barbados Revenue Authority should verify their earnings based on their annual income tax return. And that is my point, sir. Otherwise than that, I do not have an issue with members of society who have lived in houses, who have raised families in houses with not and we're not able to say, I have title to this property. I do have a concern where, of course, you always have to consider third parties, right? Who would say that they have an interest in property. All of those are things that should be taken into consideration when we're talking about title and passing title to others. So, sir, my point today will be very short because I just want to commend the bill. I just want to make the point again that we should always convince Barbadians, look, there was a clear, transparent vetting process. The vetting process was done. It was looked over. There was a report, and that report was confirmed on a very substantial basis. So that then, sir, as we're saying that title is passed, there should be reassurance to the public that persons were properly vetted. So thank you, sir. That is really my submission on this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Goodrich. Please proceed, Senator.
Mr. President, my intention is not to prolong today's sitting, and my contribution is neither that of one of humor, because I think that is important that this piece of legislation is taken in highest consideration. And some may not understand because of from whence they came. Humble beginnings teach you to understand the importance of this piece of legislation. And there are some who may have been beneficiaries of fortunate circumstances. However, I thought that I wanted to lend a very brief contribution to this, Mr. President. Sir, I just wanted to take a different approach of more so query. I recognize Senator Cummins would have alluded to the fact that there are more than about 3,000 persons eligible for a similar arrangement through which government would have to bring a legislation to this chamber. Recognizing that in 1980, the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act came, I'm querying if there's an easier way in which we can expedite such arrangements. I'm not a legal luminary, but I think there is some merit in looking or examining ways in which we can expedite this process. The truth is, the words of Kamau Brathwaite ring to me at this point, where this is an exercise in an enormous difficulty. And I say so because, truth be told, I cannot see there about, I know that there are 26 in the area of Deacon's Farm, but I appreciate that around this country there are others as well, and it will be a very extenuating process to be able to achieve this. So therefore, I am more so querying at the level of government if a way can be examined to be able to ensure that this process can be expedited. I know that Senator King, and you would recall, you spoke over the years about the ability for Barbadians to own a piece of the rock. And I'm reminded of one song in particular. We declare love for country, we declare nationhood, claiming it as our property. But trust me, I have one, a good one. Don't worry at all. But truth is, my submission, sir, as I said, is very short. I just wanted and hope that government can look at ways in which they can expedite this process to make it easier for Barbadians, because I know there are some people who have been waiting for 10 and 15 years to be able to own the properties, especially those housing areas that are more commonly called. So just that is my submission and a query to government at the same time. And sir, as I close, I think that it's important to equally note that there's these kinds of legislation, the work that we do here, sir, is serious business on the part of the people of this country. And I say so well knowing that this has a significant impact for many people. It's not a laughing matter. It's not a matter that should be treated to or punished with some sense of humor. It's a serious implications for people at the bottom of the line in this country. People who, you know, in some houses, sir, we recognize there are people who, in those small housing units, there are 7 and 8 people living in 2-bedroom houses sometimes. And it provides a unique opportunity for Barbadians to be able to feel a sense of pride and dignity. And I just want to, without in breach of the standing order, sir, to implore all senators to be reminded, especially on this particular legislation, the importance of these kinds of bills coming to this chamber. It is not something, sir, that requires for us to have any long discussion on, because it is straightforward in its truest sense. But I just want to remind all, and to all and sundry, especially public that is listening, I don't think that it is fair to Barbadians who struggle and who will benefit from this because they can't go and buy a nice house in the heights and terraces of this country. And that we treat to things like these as if there's a joke. I'm not saying that it is the manner in which has happened, but sir, with that, I'm much obliged.
Senator Slocum, I let you slide a bit, but I'm getting the feeling that you were suggesting or giving the impression to those who are not here that there was mirth and merriment. There was no mirth and merriment. There was no inappropriate or lack of decorum attending to the debate on the matter. So the constant reference to it not being the laughing matter and not being the joke, and you know, and I think that I haven't detected it. You know, of course, if I had detected it, I would have brought the House to order. So I hope that those who are hearing, you may intend one thing, but I hope that those who are in the hearing of your voice and who are not here to see would not have had any misunderstanding of the solemn note of the solemn but happy note of the Senate in pursuing this matter. So you may just want to be cautious in that regard. Thanks, Senator Slocum. Any other speakers on this item? Her Honor, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to make the point that as a former representative of one of the largest housing areas in the country, this gladdens my heart in a way that few can understand. It also makes me happy as a former member of the Owen Arthur cabinet, where the idea of selling the housing units, passing the housing units to those who had been resident for a period, I think it was the qualifying period was 20 years or more, where that idea originated. There are others. Sir, I know you followed me as housing minister. Indeed, we started the process. Another person who, to his credit, former member of parliament, Hamilton Lashley, is somebody who would have represented the Pine area, another very large housing, constituency with another very large housing area. This is something about which he would have spoken and for which he would have advocated. So for some of us, sir, I know that this is an evening of great joy. It is an evening of great joy because we can identify the families that 14 people, not 8, 14 people live in 2- and 3-bedroom units. We know the families that have built on a little something in the yard to expand so they can get extra space. We know the families, sir, whose children have done really well. and who have moved out of the community and moved into the heights and terraces, and we know those who have stayed to help to build a sense of community and to create a sense of closeness still in the place that they grew up. It gladdens my heart because this has been in repeated BLP manifestos over several years, and now it is actually happening. As I said, the process was started, but it proved to be a far more complex legal requirement than was at first anticipated. And therefore, it became so complex that even though a successor to both you and I, sir, a successor to both you and me, if my grammar is to be correct, who boasted that they would be able to get all of the housing units transferred in a very short time, I don't think they managed to convey 20 over however long they were in office, sir. But the point is that this was difficult, and I really want to congratulate all those lawyers, all of the people at the Ministry of Housing, the National Housing Corporation, in legal affairs, AGs or Solicitor Generals, who worked collaboratively to ensure that this measure is before the House today. Nearly 4,000 Barbadians. That is not a small amount. Nearly 4,000 Barbadians are about to get title deeds that gives them the fee simple absolute, the ownership outright of a property that in today's market has to be worth at least $250,000 to $300,000. It is a significant gift that the government is making to empower a class of people, some of whom are not bankable, many of whom on their own would never be able to save $25,000, which would be the deposit, the legal deposit, financial deposit, on a $250,000 property. But these people are now adding and coming in to being part of the Caribbean's largest property owning democracy. This is a significant achievement for the government, and I congratulate the Barbados Labour Party. What is also significant about it, sir, is that the Barbados Labour Party is often identified or accused of being the representative, the mouthpiece, the lever, and the agent and advocate of Caucasian and big business in Barbados. But when you look at Barbados Labour Party policies and initiatives, it is poor working class people who have benefited significantly and whose lives have been transformed, who have been able to have lives of dignity because of the initiatives of the Barbados Labour Party. And that is why I support the Barbados Labour Party. And to make the point that Senator Slocum was making, this mechanism is to expedite the transfers. At the same time, however, 4,000 conveyances is not one or two, and therefore I urge the party, the government, to disperse the work amongst a number of attorneys so that the work can be done expeditiously and that the people are not waiting another 5 years to get their... No. Sir? So that the people are not waiting another 5 years to get their conveyances in their hand. What we are attempting to do is good and right and revolutionary, but it can be thwarted and tainted unless we now ensure that the actual mechanism for the writing and transfer is actually put in place with some, expeditiously, to use the word of Senator Slocum. So this is something that can generate a lot of work in the society for legal clerks and lawyers and other persons in the field. And therefore, I urge government now, people have been already waiting for a very long time, and I want them to get to the matter of the actual transfer. I want to make to a point that, a few points, because I also have some concerns. We are giving people a significant asset that they can use as capital. They can go to the bank and use it to invest in another property, to establish a business, and so on. And that is good. But we must be careful that those who are given this asset treat it, well, you know, there's an expression, easy come, easy go. So that we must be very careful, sir, that persons who have a property that is worth, now let's say $250 as a market value estimate, would not be persuaded for a little $10,000 or $5,000 loan or $1,500 loan to mortgage their property to persons who already have property elsewhere and do not need property in these areas. Because what you could find is that people who have cash in the marketplace exploit this to themselves become owners and landlords in these areas. Also, the people who were the original and intended beneficiaries to put in paying tenants because the properties have been mortgaged for small monies. So we have to put mechanisms in place to protect what we like to call poor people, because sometimes people not fully appreciating what they've been given, or in a situation of extreme stress where they need $1 to pay off an immediate bill or to do something urgent, or a period of short-term unemployment where they don't have capital coming in and the children still have to go to school and bills still have to be paid, could find themselves giving up or letting go of their properties for small amounts of cash, well below what the properties are worth, and some of them could really be tricked as well. So I am cautioning those people, all of those people in Haynesville whose faces I see, with whom I would love to celebrate and with whom my heart rejoices, that they must now hold on to this asset that has been given to them. I do not know anywhere else in the Caribbean where it has happened. And it builds on Barbados Labour Party policy, because if you consider going back to the Tom Adams era, from the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, how we have always sought to ensure that people at the bottom of the ladder have access to capital and to property and to the asset of land and property. In fact, if you drive through rural Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean, rural Barbados looks very much like urban communities in other Caribbean countries. And it is because people who benefited from land at 10 cents under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act were then able to build substantial properties on the land that they had gotten, sir, as we would say in Barbados, for next kin to nothing. Next kin to nothing, to put the words in English. So it is building on Barbados Labour Party policy that originated in the 70s and is now reaching a different iteration at this time. I want to stress to those people that know that you do not have the obligation of rent. You have a responsibility to pay your water. There are many people in these units who will pay all kinds of other bills. They will pay their electricity, but they will not pay their water bills. And I'm concerned too that those who still have rent obligations should not say, well, they're going to give the unit to me eventually, so what's the point of paying? People have continuing financial obligations, which I hope they will observe. Equally, sir, the government has a responsibility, as I understand it, to continue to maintain the wells the open spaces, the drains, and so on, and it is critical that government maintains that responsibility. And because without that level of upkeep, now that you have all these disparate property owners, and you don't have in place community organizations or people who necessarily have the resources to do community maintenance, if government does not continue to shoulder that responsibility and to do it assiduously, you could well find these places looking like ghettos in no time at all. So it is critical too that that protection takes place. It makes me ask the question then, sir, what is government's policy in relation to low-income housing? I do not like to talk about low-income housing because I don't think there's any such thing as a low-income house. People build what they can afford. So I like to talk about primary homes and secondary homes and tertiary homes and big, big houses in the heights and terraces and so on. I ask what is government's policy because I don't know how many new housing units for rental will be going up. You are just losing a large pool of housing units to the rental market. And we've been told that there's a waiting list of about 17,000 people at NHC between renters, potential renters or tenants, and purchasers. How are those on the waiting list now to be serviced? I believe that we still have to continue to build rental units for those who cannot afford to face the commercial marketplace. But I have always believed, and I would tell you that Prime Minister Oynath and I disagreed very strongly on this, but it remains my belief that where housing units of this sort are built, some should be built specifically to remain perpetually in the rental pool, and others should be built as rent to own, so that you may not be able to save a large amount of money to accumulate a deposit for purchase, but you know that you are moving in with a view that your rent will accrue toward your purchase price, and other people will move in with the specific knowledge that this is not where they propose to stay, that their object is to buy a property over there or somewhere else, and this is a rental arrangement to give them a step up or for a particular period of their life. So you move out from home, you're in your first job, you're not making any big money, but you don't want mommy and daddy telling you who to bring in when the night come, or what you're supposed to eat, or that them cooking soup, so you better eat the soup, and so on and so forth. You're playing your music too loud, granny says she wants to sleep, and this is her house, turn off or get out. You want to be in at you, and therefore it may be a first home for somebody who doesn't want to stay there, who will later move out as their income increases, as they move into their second job and so on. And that is an opportunity equally that we are going to have to continue to create. So my question would therefore be, if we are going to continue to have rental units, is it then the policy of government that you're going to have rent to own plus pure rentals, and are you going to rotate these houses out every 20 or 25 years and say to people, well, you've been in the units for 20 plus years, here, they are yours? Is that the policy of the government? Because that requires a different kind of mindset and financial investment from if you are putting a few units in the pool every year that you are going to continue to rent, because you know then if somebody feels that in 20 years they can get a free unit, irrespective of how much they are making, they're not going to move out. Why would they if they can get a free house? And then the instant, which is another concern that I have, the instant then the unit is sold to them, they sell it. So we should be careful that there is a caveat that these properties cannot be sold below market value and cannot be sold within a specific amount of time of being transferred to the original owner or to the beneficiary. Otherwise, we really would be creating new dynamics altogether, and new social and economic, and perhaps, well, new social and economic dynamics. I think that everybody understands the breadth of the implications of what I'm saying, so I'm not going to elaborate. Another challenge that we have had in relation to the units, and I believe there is going to be some element of confusion in relation to the transfer, is over ownership. Because what you have had is Mary Smith renting a unit and deciding to go to the States for a couple of years. So they put in John Brown. John Brown may or may not be paying the rent, but NHC recognizes Mary Smith as the owner and as the occupant, the tenant, the qualified tenant. Meanwhile, Mary Smith is living in the United States and has not come back to Barbados for the last 5 years. And there are a lot of situations like that where children moved in, our relatives moved out, our relatives moved in. You have a situation where a man may have left or a woman may have left, their partner may be in the place, they're still the qualified tenant, they're bringing another partner, the other partner wants to argue that they're the person with the financial interest, because these properties will now become the subject of lawsuits in, in spousal disputes and matrimonial disputes, and indeed family disputes, because you know the ownership of land is a big source of agitation at the social level in Barbados. Families quarrel bad, relatives quarrel bad, people fight and chop up one another over boundary lines, and they're only talking about 3 inches. A difference of 3 inches on a boundary line, and that becomes a problem. Whether the land passed seed to seed, and uncle this body was to get it, but auntie this body dead, and cousin so-and-so move away, and he don't speak to me no more, but so-and-so. All kinds of stories you hear. So that these units, because they are now owned property, are also going to be the subject of legal disputes, and I would think a great deal of confusion. So these are things that government has to be cognizant of. Now, we cannot legislate or provide remedies for every possible mischief or wrong that is likely to occur, but we can anticipate where the challenges can occur that would thwart the intent of the legislation, so that the beneficiary group does not really benefit over the long term as government intends and hopes with the creation of this policy. I think, sir, that really captures the government, the germ of what I want to say and the points that I want to make, to urge government about its continuing responsibility for maintenance, to raise questions about the sense of community and the fact that we have to ensure that there continues to be a pool of rental units, the use of the mechanism of rent to own, whether or not this is now a new pattern that we are going to see, that all government units will be rotated over a 20-year period. We need clarity on those things. And in fact, if government has not made policy decisions, it really needs to, because it would not be fair that only one set of people in Barbados should ever benefit from this transfer. At the same time, if you are going to have rotations every 20, 25 years, you have to ensure that you do have a rental pool available to those who absolutely need it, who cannot face the commercial markets and whose incomes are such that they cannot get property to rent at rates that are affordable for them. We have to ensure that people are not, to use a Bajan word, unfared and the property taken away from them for small sums. I think there is just one more point I would wish to make. There was some comment when the Honourable Leader of Government Business did her introductory remarks about covenants against commercial activity. I'm deeply concerned about that. At the moment, in Barbados, in communities, we have people who will set up fridge repair businesses and car repair businesses. And the community becomes a dumping ground for every car, fridge, lawnmower, whatever it is, that they were never able to repair. They keep the things there, they cannibalize them, they gather rodents, capture water and breed mosquitoes. You have to step over them to try to get into the property. They are a nuisance, they are an eyesore, and we want to ensure that controls are in place to prevent that from happening. At the same time, however, we do want, within the context of the community, to encourage small entrepreneurs to invest and to have businesses. A lot of people who are selling soft drinks, clothes, etc., are doing it from home. Sometimes they belong a little something in the back. People, you wouldn't want to stop a small barber shop or barbering enterprise. You wouldn't want to stop an esthetician from doing eyelashes or nails or something of that sort. So we, in seeking to protect the community from itself, we also have to be careful that we do not inadvertently prevent this kind of enterprise and entrepreneurship, which people will legitimately play within the context of their community, drawing their first clients from their neighbors who live around them. And in fact, in a large housing area, if you are a good barber or a good esthetician, you really can end up with quite a few clients from the community who find it convenient just to nip down by you, get their service provided, and then go back to their own homes, which are within walking distance. And we really want to encourage that level of entrepreneurship, particularly at the community level. Here is another area, but I did say barbering, so of course I'm including hairdressers in that. Had we done this before elections, people would have said that it was an election gimmick and that we are doing it to try to buy votes and all kinds of things. The fact that it comes at this time, consequent upon a promise that has been made repeatedly, shows the government's seriousness in addressing housing, shows the government's seriousness in addressing housing within the poorer sections of the community, proves the government's determination to fulfill its manifesto commitments and to ensure that Barbados is a property-owning democracy and that persons who themselves, in their own name and on their own effort, would not have been able to afford a property now have a valuable asset and a title deed with their name on it. I trust that God will bless all of them, that they will use this asset wisely, that we will continue in housing areas to build a sense of community life where people feel connected to one another, and that this will continue to define Barbados as one of the more progressive small countries and one of the more progressive developing countries in the world. And I'm honored, delighted, satisfied, overjoyed. I could think, sir, of many, many verbs to use to support this initiative and this legislation.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Senator Thompson. If there are no more speakers, I'll ask Senator Cummins to weigh in.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I also would want to thank all of the members who have spoken, Senator Goodrich, Senator Slocum, and Senator Thompson, Madam Deputy President. Now, I just want to make a few things clear. This is the process, as the Deputy President has outlined, of expediting, and I thought that I went through the process of conveyancing and how long it can take, and by vesting and doing it in this way, this is the expedited process. In order to get here, Mr. President, there was quite a bit of work that had to be done. Government wanted to do this a long time ago and started the work a long time ago. So they started the process of doing all of the surveying and all of that kind of stuff, and the lawyers were aggressively working through this over the course of several months. The properties that you see vested in this legislation in this first instance would cover from Bonnets, Deacon's Farm, Denton Road and Grisette's, Ferniehurst, Gall Hill, Golden Acres, St. Stephen's, St. Matthias, and Bonnets, and many of those other places. But the areas that I have outlined before, this is the legislation that is applicable to all of them. So while these ones have been completed already, and you have had the opportunity to complete all of these surveys and all of that kind of work and the conveyancing, and you see the vesting, you also can see from the ones that are listed here that many of these are for persons who have also passed on and their estates have been accounted for, and therefore they have completed that legal process also, so this makes it easier. But the work continues to allow for this exact process in the ones that have completed their processes to be followed by the others in other terraced estates all across the country, as long as they meet the requisite standards. I want also to thank Senator Thompson for her comments, especially on maintaining certain types of activity in communities. The Ministry of Health and Wellness also has responsibility for the Environmental Health Department, and under that department, oftentimes we're constantly bombarded by all kinds of complaints from communities, from persons who are dealing with things like, you mentioned fridges piled up. You don't just have one or two, or you know that it's just you and your son, but you take 50 fridges and you don't work on them over the course of a year, 5 years, and they just pile up and you keep taking more and more and more internal to communities, and it becomes a nuisance to others. Same thing with vehicles piled up along the road, some of them rusting, some of them in poor condition, and then environmental health comes in and it also presents issues for rodent control. Worse yet, when these communities and this type of activity is happening nearby to things like schools, because then you have these things not originating on the school compound in some instances, but originating in the communities and then finding their way into the school environment to become a problem for other people. And so this kind of activity, commercial activity, hoarding activity in communities is an absolute nuisance to members of the community, and we want to make sure that conveyancing and covenants go hand in hand, and that we do not turn everybody's residential community into a commercial community. And when we talk about, Mr. President, low-income housing versus first homes, and primary housing versus secondary homes, and heights versus terraces, Mr. President, chances are, if you live in a height or a terrace and you keep your community clean, and you have your gardener, or you have your weed whacker and your lawnmower, and you go out and you cut your grass and you keep your premises clean, the persons who live in primary housing as described by Senator Thompson or low-income housing as described by others are no less entitled to clean and comfortable surroundings, and confusing those communities with all the kind of activity that we're seeing is certainly not befitting comfortable living for many persons in these communities. And so I support those comments wholeheartedly. People have a right to live in dignity and in clean surroundings. So, Mr. President, this is the bill that is before the Honourable Chamber, and I beg to move that it be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair. The Honourable, the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Committee is now in session.
Madam Deputy President, Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1 do now stand part.
Question is that Clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Jonathan, your microphone. Your microphone.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 4 do now stand.
The question is that Clause 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 5 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 5 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The Deputy President has just reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the State Acquisition and Vesting of Property Act of 2026.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the State Acquisition and Vesting of Property Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The nays the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Private members' business.
Private members' business. Senator Mallow.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to give notice of a resolution. Resolution reads, whereas under Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 228 of the laws of Barbados, the state can acquire land for public purpose. And whereas under the Section 3 of the said Act, the Minister is authorized to acquire lands for public purposes. And whereas the Constitution provides that no property shall be compulsorily acquired except by and under the authority of any written law, and whereas no claim for compensation under the Land Acquisition Act shall be admitted or entertained unless it is made in writing within 2 years of the publication of Section 5 notice in the Official Gazette, and whereas the present state of the law allows the compulsory acquisition to be completed without timely payment or none at all to the owner of the land, and whereas the law does not compel the Minister to give details of the public purpose, and whereas in the interest of good governance and transparency, it is desirable that public purposes are more clearly defined in the legislation, be it resolved that the Land Acquisition Act be amended to reflect the following. A, that purposes are more clearly defined in the legislation. B, that compensation being offered is informed by a public and private valuation. C, that payment of compensation must be completed within 3 months of the Section 5 notice. And D, that the title not be perfected until the compensation has been paid.
Thank you, Senator Mallow. Is there a seconder? No seconder required? Just given the notice at this stage. Yes. Okay. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, this brings us to the conclusion of government's business for today, and I beg to move as a result. Before, of course, let me start first by thanking all honourable senators for working through the day on these two important bills, and I beg to move that the Senate be adjourned at this time, sine die.
The question is that the Honourable the Senate do now adjourn sine die. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senate stands adjourned sine die.